Hi everyone, Chuck Niemer here. I'm putting out this video or this recording on a PowerPoint here to start some conversations in looking at our supply chain and the feeling I've had for many years that we're looking at our supply chains wrong. We do a lot of the tools with DDMRP and ERP and all sorts of systems and new technologies and everything else, and they work part way, but we're not getting the success that we want. And what's always bothered me is that perhaps we're looking at them incorrectly and we're not able to fully utilize because we're thinking about them wrong. So my hope with the PowerPoint here is to start some conversations. For myself, it's reframed how I look at supply chains, but it's also pushed me to start a newsletter, writing a book, changing how I teach my supply chain. And so what I want to look at here is our supply chains, I think, while we look at them kind of mechanistically in plan and control, we should be looking at them like they're living systems, complex adaptive systems. And this has been something I've been working on for probably or wrestling with for easily 20 years as I first started working on my thesis. So let's jump to the second slide here for a second and talk about what my feeling is here. My central question that you see here, why do we keep failing in these predictable ways? We've got all this new technology, all of this data, all this expertise, but we see the same thing. We see demand volatility and the small changes and the bullwhip effect. And there's many things we certainly do with them. There's a lot of wonderful work being done with the demand-driven area for putting in buffers. And I think those are great tools and they're the correct tools. We see we've got fragile networks. We've done single sourcing and sole sourcing, and one little disruption just ripples all the way through the supply chain. And again, we're learning about those by dual sourcing, et cetera, and those are the right things to do. And lastly, we still struggle with this. Hey, I do a process improvement in my area. It looks like it works. At the same time, it creates problems across the system and we're missing something in this conversation. So, like I say at the very bottom there, I think we're looking at it wrong, and we need to look at it like our supply chains are fundamentally different models. And so, my argument again is we're looking at the system wrong. Nothing wrong with the tools, but it's how we're going about looking at it that I think we're missing some fundamental decisions in how we put together our supply chains that are inhibiting our ability to see what's going on, as well as think about how all the work should be done. So let's start out by talking about what is this concept of the complex adaptive systems here. And as I read this and give you examples, don't be surprised if you find yourself thinking, oh, we do that. We do that here. We do this here. Yeah, we are complex adaptive systems. Well, we are, but because we don't think about it from that perspective as a living system, we miss some important decisions. So, as you see here, network of independent agents making local decisions and the collection of all those interactions, typically today, and it'll happen in the future as well, as it creates behaviors that we didn't expect. Okay. So, looking at complex systems generically, many agents that constantly change and constantly adapt to what's going on in the environment. In our case, we've got tons of suppliers, carriers, factories, people working in factories, planners, schedulers, logistics folks, and we're each acting on rules and incentives that are, localized but not looking at the whole. And we'll go deeper into that as we catch a slide or two down the road. Complex adaptive systems have feedback loops. Information gets passed back through the system so people can react to it. My argument would be, but they're not fast enough. So how do we make them faster? And so what happens when we have these challenges of how people are incentivized and delays in information getting back, we end up with behavior emerging that doesn't serve us well. And so the argument gets to be, how do we build systems so that behavior focuses is on the system as a whole. Complex adaptive systems also, they're very nonlinear. One little disruption can ripple through the supply chain. Think about when you go to the doctor and they're not going to say no to a patient, so they'll double book. And that little ripple effect cascades all the way through the rest of the day. Airplanes taking off late, one little thing happening early in the morning carries through the whole system and all sorts of unexpected behavior. Complex adaptive systems also learn and change. And so we evolve together in that process. And what happens then is we reorganize on our own, and there isn't a central person coordinating that self reorganization and organization. It happens with the flows. The example I have here is thinking of traffic and how traffic changes and flows based on behavior. But I also think of an organization I worked for. We called it PDC versus TET. And that's what I want to challenge you with. You can plan, direct, and control, or you can teach, equip, and trust. And I think today we look at it like PDC. We have to plan, direct, control everything when we should be teaching and equipping, trust people to do the right thing. But again, we've got some questions we have to answer in the process. So looking ahead here a bit, I want you to think about your supply chain's already acting that way. Question for me is, are we managing it like that? We have many agents, suppliers, planners, schedulers, providers, and they've got all their individual directions. And you've seen me talk about incentives a couple times here. I want you to think about this for a moment. Incentives are, yes, how we're getting paid. Maybe we get bonuses, pats on the back, etc. But incentives affecting our behavior could also be, does my boss yell at me when a mistake happens? Okay, that's going to incentivize me to change my behavior possibly and do something that's locally needed to calm the situation, but it's not helping the company as a whole here. It could be politics and dynamics in the organizational structure. Should I say something or not? Well, I won't say something because I'm just a frontline person. I'm not the manager. That's their job. We do see emergent behavior. Behaviors and results come out that we're like, wow, where'd that one come from? And it comes from the individual agents making decisions that make sense in the moment. But because of latency and lagging responses and feedbacks and how I'm shaped and incentivized, we get different behaviors out there. Supply chains also have nonlinear responses. Look what happened when we had the chip shortage. Look what happened back when we had the blockage in the Suez Canal where the ship hit the shore and it was months. There wasn't anybody controlling that, but behavior was affected. And we're going through that geopolitically now. And certainly, as we make changes in our supply chain, our suppliers react to that and move with us. So do our competitors, et cetera, and it changes it for everyone. So the four blue boxes are characteristics of a complex adaptive systems. We're already acting like that. Again, the question, are we managing like that? Okay. Again, no problems with the tools that are out there that you and I use, but because of the way we look at it, we are probably missing some of the core issues and some of the core things we have to start thinking about and making new decisions about. So to me, these are the three big problems. Misalignment in incentives. Okay. And you can read it on the screen. Procurement drives cost, sales chases revenue. Customers wait till quarter end to place their orders, and we get the hockey stick effect and we cram things through at the end of the quarter. Nobody is accountable. We're aware of it, but nobody's accountable for system behavior. So we make what seems to be local decisions that when we look at it globally, they don't make sense. And so my argument at the bottom is we've got to think about the signals that are occurring, the rewards that are occurring for the behaviors, and think about how we redesign all that so that what we do locally aligns with the overall health of our organization. And again, I think we all know this. As you're listening to this, you're thinking, we do that. But do we go back and think about how we architect or create or structure or build our supply chain? Feedback loops number two, takes too long for feedback to come back. I can hear about something today. I've got to let people know about it. They've got to check with others. They're going to get back to me. Day or two could take time for things to happen. So now the situation's changed. We finally hear back. We react to it, and it probably amplifies the problem because the problem's changed again, which is the bullwhip effect. And if you think back to COVID, when it really hit us, that's the most recent one. All of a sudden, people started buying extra paper products and baking products and everything else. And we all know the story. But the feedback loop, it took a while for folks on the front end to start allocating and restricting how much people could buy. So, what do we have to do to shorten the feedback loops, make them happen quicker? How do we look at the loops of feedback and design so people can design the process of the system or the supply chain or the company, job descriptions, whatever, but we've got to design and support quicker feedback loops. And if we think of it the way we are now, my argument would be I don't think it's going to happen. We need to think about it. This is a living system, constantly changing, constantly adapting. How do we make these feedback loops happen quicker? And like you see in number three, based on the structure, incentives, how we measure, how we agree to things, how we report, it just isn't keeping up with the volatility of our environment. And so we got a system designed for slow moving, and the world's moving quicker. And so, how do we build architecture, supply chains, culture, so that the structure itself moves with the conditions going on? So I find myself coming back to the company I worked at, PDC versus TET. Do we try to plan, direct, and control everybody? Or do we try to teach, equip, trust people, cut them loose to react according to what's needed for the system as a whole? So this is kind of where I start moving to, hey, today we're on the left side in red. We need to get to the right side. Okay. But like it says above, you can't control it. We are a complex system. You can't control it. But can we build the conditions that supports people doing the things on the right? So how do we allow, what do we have to put in place? Job titles, guidance, instructions, whatever, that allow people to feel things, sense things, respond quicker. I just heard the supplier that we're working with, they got a snowstorm coming. What's going to help us sense that and respond and get information back quickly? Diversified resilience here. We're not talking diversity as much as where we're doing more with dual sourcing and second sources. Yes, there are costs right now. Yes, we have buffers in inventory and done well, they're correct. But in today's environment, we look at that as a cost and it doesn't benefit us until a failure happens. And then we're grateful it happened. So, how do we support people putting things in place for resilience and not dinging them financially for a financial decision on that area? How do we, again, teach, equip, trust, distribute authority down to the front line? What do we have to do to move in that direction? I look at optimized flow, absorb and adapt. I think of DDMRP, okay, as a great example of buffers to be able to handle that kind of thing. And we have to look at the whole supply chain we're part of and look where variation happens across the whole supply chain, not just inventory, but organizationally and how we do S&OP, how marketing operates, how stakeholders operate. How do we start to adapt to a variation? Because the goal is to respond faster because complex adaptive systems are constantly changing, constantly adapting. We need to do it in response to what's going on in the marketplace. So, what are you and I doing to design the conditions that make it more likely to behave the way we want and the way we need? That's the central question. Same tools, hearing the same things you heard before, but are you and I stepping back and saying, well, what are the conditions that need to be in place to make it so that people behave the way we need them to? And what are we doing to design the structures and the architecture to allow that to happen? And I think that's the piece that we're missing, that I'm writing about in my newsletter, the book I'm writing, the classes I teach. So from a supply chain standpoint, here's what that means. We've got to have components or think of agents that could fail, but they're loosely connected. There's buffers between them that if they fail, they don't ripple through the rest of the system. The resilience, the duplication, etc. So how do we build that stretch into the supply chain? And what are the questions we have to ask that say, how do we build stretch into the supply chain? So that's where number two comes in. That redundancy can feel like waste right now. Oh my gosh, I could have used the money or the resources elsewhere. But when the disruption hits, we're grateful. It's the only thing that saves us. So, how do we make that accepted and standard? That takes a mindset based on how we operate that's going to be different than what it currently is. How do we help people sense and deliver signals quickly? Where the action is, the front line. How do we set it up so that there's visibility? And yes, you're right there. Make the decision. That shortens up the feedback loop and it gets things moving because otherwise, when information comes late, it's worthless. Okay. It's too late. We have to get consistency in number four across the network is how we're measured, the metrics, the contracts, the governance, how we make decisions, how we manage people, how we give feedback to people. How do we set up a system that supports people operating to the health of the whole organization? And then after things occur, number five, how do we go through the lessons learned quickly and update the systems and institutionalize that whole area so that we're able to change and adapt and respond quicker and get smarter over time. Okay. And again, I keep coming back to that theme that says everything I'm saying here, we're all, myself included, saying, yep, we do this or we do this or we do that. But I think what's missing is that whole idea that says, I got to step back and am I planning, directing, and controlling everything? Am I still too mechanistic? I need to be on the other side of the teach, equip, and trust and let, put the architecture and structure in place that allows that growth to happen and let the system do its thing. Excuse me. Okay. So it's really, you can read the screen while I've been talking there, and these are six things we have to do, but it's the italicized words on top I want you to think about. It isn't technology. It's how we lead and how we organize and how we design our supply chain. That's where it's got to happen. We've got to go back and rethink our network. Okay, who are the people in there? Second one's really interesting to me. What do they act on? Okay, where are they getting the information from? The feedback loop. Are they able to get it to somebody else? Are they getting it fast enough? Okay. Audit your incentives on the right is how we're operating, not just job descriptions and bonuses and that type of thing, but just, how we operate. Are they localizing at the expense of everything? We got to look at what's driving people to do what they do. Third one, how do we get information moving through the system quicker? Okay. The latency that occurs is just killing us. Okay. The redundancy part, okay. Can we absorb a major disruption and be left standing and reconfigure? Risk management's given us all sorts of interesting ideas there. And not just performance, but measuring system behavior. What are the metrics we got to put in place to be able to measure our people moving and operating is as system-wide performance? And finally, how do we learn and allow the system to adapt? And again, I keep saying it, but I'm going to keep repeating it. I think our challenge is we're looking at our supply chains wrong. And therefore we architect them wrong. Their systems constantly changing and adapt, and we have to develop and architect a system that does the same. Okay. Now, going a little bit deeper into planners and analysts here on slide 9 and slide 10, what's it going to look like for my job as a planner, analyst, scheduler, operations folk? It's on the right side. Okay. Um, I would suspect it's a topic that's part of it. I just saw it in a presentation today. AI is coming. I'm not trying to scare anybody out, but AI is going to do the grunt work for a lot of us. We're not going to go diving through the systems and everything else. Done correctly and well, and we're going through the projects to learn it. AI is going to come back and say, here's what's going on. Here's 3 or 4 recommendations. What should we do? And that's when you and I are going to be coming into the conversation. We're going to be, like you see on the right side, reading signals, watching what's going on, and we're going to react with AI and give out early warnings of things that could be happening and how we handle it. And if you look at the very bottom before we go through the rest of it, it's going to be a little bit less of executing the plan. We're going to steward or be the shepherd of the system. Second one, we're going to monitor emergent behavior. We're going to be watching for when dynamics are, hey, this happened, it produced this. I got to raise the flag now and get people going. Simple rules. Okay. We're going to guide people to make decisions. I get back to the teach, equip, trust. We're going to teach the guidelines and say, you're the planner, do it. We have to put things in place that support that, certainly, but let the person on the front line make that call. Okay. I've worked in that environment of TET, teach, equip, trust, and I'm telling you, it worked. Okay. Fourth one, measure adaptive capacity. Again, we've got pieces in place for some of this. The SCORE DS model talks about agility and sets a metric out there of how fast you can respond within 30 days. Well, if we got the metric, have we got the systems in place and the architecture to support people responding quicker and quick enough? And how do we share information, the feedback loops, the latency? This all feels like we're answering a lot of good questions, but we're missing some still. And it goes back to those 3 areas. Let me just jump back for a sec here. It comes back to we've got to look at how we build or architect our supply chain to deal with these 3 areas here, because we got problems in all 3. So let me come back here. Operations. There's the local agents, the people that are on the front lines, in the factory, on the shipping dock, salesperson closest to the customer. They're the closest to the real conditions, real-time information. Their judgment, providing it is in the context of system as a whole, matters more, because they're right there. Because otherwise, they got to feed information back, get the approvals on it, check on something else to see if it can be done, and they've got to check with somebody else. And by the time they get back to us, things have changed. Okay. So this is what operational or frontline folks, not just the factory, but frontline folks everywhere, this is what their job's going to look like. Okay. They're the ones that are going to watch for and see disruptions before they get to be a problem. They're going to report it up now and be part of making that decision, not just pass it on to somebody else. Okay. We're going to give them the simple rules to say, not every situation is going to get documented, but here's where we're going. Here's the boundaries of our behavior. As long as we operate within there, go for it. Okay. And if they understand why, we should be in good shape. They're also the ones that are going to make changes on the fly. Again, it's not a workbook for every situation, but we've given them guidance to reconfigure. And again, the main point, speed of local response is what gets us there to constant change. Okay. And we've got to be working with suppliers and customers for the same things. Okay. And what do we learn afterwards at the bottom? So here's the core argument. Our supply chains are living systems. They're complex systems. Okay. Nobody can control the collective behavior. And we're challenged because number two, we manage them like machines, and yet we get the same thing. And number three is the biggie. It's not more control. It's how we built our supply chain. It's better architecture. How do we design and lead and manage and improve the conditions that allow constant change, constant adaptation, response, resilience, learning? Okay. How do you and I, as leaders, do that rather than micromanage the situation? And that, I think, is the difference we've got to think about. So, we're not going to eliminate disruption. I think we all know that. But it's an interesting comment at the bottom. How do I learn and adapt faster than disruptions arriving? So, if I can be responding and getting things in place quicker as the disruption is identified and moved towards me, I'm in better shape. And if I can do this better than my competitors, I'm going to own the market. To be real blunt, I think is what's going to happen in that process. So getting back to the very beginning, this is, if it interests you, I'd love to have you participate in the conversations. This is the newsletter that I've started here. This is the book I'm writing. Is I think we're looking at it wrong. We have to build an adaptive supply chain. My argument again is I don't think it's the tools. We see people argue again. I'm a big fan of it. The demand driven folks because they solve a lot of the problems. But there's areas in the communication, the marketing, stakeholders, all sorts of other areas. We've got to look at the supply chain as a whole, from tier two to tier one suppliers to us to distributors to warehouses. We've got to rethink and re-architect that whole supply chain. And that's the direction that I'm headed. And like I said, I'm challenging you to think about it. We're using the good tools, but are we using them right in the right context? So looking for feedback, looking for conversations. Let's go for it.